The biggest challenge for us as a security organization has been providing secure cloud access for our internal teams for just the products that we build. It just goes against every probably cloud security person's ideal design on how to hand out permissions. And hey, I need root access to this account because I literally have to be able to call every API call. We've had to get real creative with how we segment out, development accounts and production, non-prod, et cetera.
Welcome to a new episode of All Aboard, the show where we have real conversations with IT and security practitioners. No fluff, no talking points, just straight talk from experts and advice for tackling the toughest problems facing cloud-forward companies today. I'm your host, Alex Bowie, CEO and co-founder of ConnectorOne. For today's episode, I'm beyond thrilled to be hosting Will Bengston. Will is a security researcher, angel investor, and currently leads security engineering at HashiCorp. Will and his team know all about managing access in the cloud. They built a platform comprising two tools, Doormat and Passport, that manage permissions and access to a myriad of SaaS apps and over 20,000 AWS accounts. Although their scale may be unique, the underlying pain points they were solving for are common to companies of all sizes. In this episode, Will gives insight into how HashiCorp's security engineering team approached privileged access management for the cloud and why they rooted that approach in the principle of least privilege access. Needless to say, these are themes that resonate deeply with us and our mission here at ConnectorOne. Let's get into it. Will, I appreciate you joining the podcast today. I'm really excited to talk with you about all things least privilege access, cloud privilege access management. I know those are a few areas that you're responsible for at HashiCorp, but I think also your role is pretty broad and all-encompassing. And I was thinking for the listeners, maybe you could just walk through and talk a little bit more about your role and what you're responsible for at HashiCorp.
Sure. Yeah, so I joined HashiCorp a little over 3.5 years ago now. Originally started running threat detection for my boss, Tala Tariq, our chief security officer. And since then, I've grown kind of call it my mini org, or we're calling it just security engineering today. But it's essentially head of security engineering, encompassing cloud and platform security, threat detection, response, identity access management, corporate security, and the red team. And so kind of evolving over time as the org matures and evolves as well. So, HashiCorp being a 10 plus year company, we're 4+ years in the cloud now. So we've really, in our time as a security org, been focused on building best practices, kind of the foundational pieces needed to be successful in the cloud. And so, yeah, I've been focusing a ton of time all over the board, but one particular topic when you mentioned if I'd be interested in coming on is the, identity topic, and I love identity, so I'm super stoked to be here today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive deep into this topic because this is something near and dear to my heart. Mini org, it sounds like you have a lot of responsibility. That's pretty all-encompassing, pretty broad. But yeah, let's go deeper on the identity topic in particular. I'm really curious. It sounds like maybe HashiCorp was less in the cloud maybe 10 years ago, but you guys have experienced tremendous growth. I know that you have pretty prolific cloud services today with Terraform Cloud and a bunch of the other services. But can you talk a little bit about, as you've moved to the cloud and particularly as you've owned identity and access management for cloud infrastructure and for employees, what are some of the traps and footfalls you've bumped along the way, and what are some of the problems that you've had to focus on solving?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey, especially coming in 6 years into the company's existence. A new security org is born, and there's all of a sudden rules change, if you will. I'd say the most interesting thing that's been the biggest challenge for us as a security organization has been providing secure cloud access for our internal teams and sales for just the products that we build. Terraform, which theoretically, depending on how you build a template, can call every API in the cloud. Vault needing access to create users and things in the cloud. It just goes against every probably cloud security person's ideal design on how to hand out permissions. And hey, I need root access to this account because I literally have to be able to call every API call. So it's been, we've had to get real creative with how we segment out, development accounts and production, non-prod, et cetera. I think the biggest thing for us is, we've gone public, but I still think we're like that scrappy startup phase where we're still blowing and building really fast. And so we've had to figure out the right approach from how do we build quickly while giving folks the access they need to be successful while still doing what's right for HashiCorp and our customers of securing the cloud. And so we've done that through just basically growing as large as we can in the cloud. I think when we started our journey towards maturing our cloud footprint, we were around 40 AWS accounts. I meant to log in and get the actual number for this morning, but we're somewhere around 22,000 AWS accounts across 14 orgs. I forget how many thousands GCP and Azure projects and subscriptions we have. So we, immediately got into a situation where, we wanted to be able to give folks access to do what they needed. We needed a way to be able to protect not accessing other people's services and whatnot. The easiest way for us to do that was kind of just explode. I call it horizontally. And so I think back to my Netflix days where we at Netflix were very large in the cloud. I always say now that Netflix was a very vertical scale. A lot of assets in a lot of accounts, where HashiCorp were few assets in many, many more accounts. And so we've tried to scale horizontally as a way to really enable our teams internally to do what they need without having to really focus on, how many roles do we need for these 10 people to operate in this account? We can do some very cut and dry admin, developer, view access, and be pretty successful that way. So I'd say that was probably the thing is kind of, how are we going to scale successfully while still limiting access to the things that we want to limit access to? And through that, we hit all sorts of identity problems, if you will. We were a Google shop when I first started, pulling in Okta, and then we became this kind of half Okta, half Google shop. We tried to keep Office Z all within Google groups. And as we did our first part of the scaling, that's where we first hit our kind of foot gun, if you will, of I learned a lot too much about Google groups than I've wanted to know. But we essentially, if you think of 3 roles per account plus a root account for AWS, if you think of those as three group or 4 group objects, if for 22,000 accounts, you're already at 88,000 groups. And that's just covering AWS. And then you got everything else that we're trying to do access management for. And if you want to provide some default access for core teams like security or infrastructure teams, you might go down the route of giving them access to everything by default in the beginning because you haven't built, or there's not a way to build request flows yet outside of the help desk. And so you quite quickly hit these limitations that you had no idea existed. Like you can only be a member of 2,500 groups in Google at a time. You can only be a subgroup of 2,500 groups as well. And so we real quickly had to change the way that we did things. And a lot of it was kind of like, oops, I broke my team's access because we just spun up these 12 accounts. And so let's quickly develop around this. And so it's been quite a fun journey. And then, if you think about in our journey in Okta, we sync Google groups into Okta. Turns out when you have over 100,000 Google groups, it takes a long time to sync those groups into Okta. The user experience just became crap when it came to, hey, I need access to this thing. Okay, well, we put you in the Google group. Within the next 24 hours, you should theoretically get access if the imports work correctly. And so, it's kind of just as we've scaled, we hit one thing after another that we've been fortunate enough to engineer around, but definitely things that I would have never thought we'd hit. But they've been kind of fun.
Those are insane scale problems. Like, yeah, even as you were talking about 22,000 accounts and 4 roles per account, it's like running the mental math on that. And that's like such a non-human scale problem to even grok and understand kind of who has access to what resources and applications and different accounts and roles. I got to imagine things like the AWS dashboard probably doesn't even work if you have that many accounts. I mean, I don't know, maybe it does, but I just imagine like fundamental technical limitations across all these different solutions. And on that note, it sounds like you guys ended up building some custom tooling and technology to really help kind of both address those scale issues, but it sounds like also operationalize some of the some of the goals and the objectives that you were trying to achieve. It sounds like, least privilege being a part of it, and just-in-time access and requests and self-service. Can you talk a little bit about what that tooling looked like and what you built there? It's very relevant for us because obviously we're in this like IGA PAM, modern IGA, modern PAM space, and that sounds very very analogous. So I'm kind of curious what your team built there.
Yeah. Once again, it was kind of very organic growth as needs arose, if you will. We started, this kind of dates back to the half Google, half Okta world where, we were a Google auth primary shop, Okta being our way to SAML into things. When we really started expanding in the cloud, we were trying to move away from IAM users for access for teams, and we were moving towards SAML and AWS. I had been at Netflix when we broke SAML, as in you're part of too many groups, that the SAML response is greater than the 50 kilobyte limit per the RFC spec. And I've been at companies where they shard that across multiple SAML endpoints, which becomes confusing. And so, quickly we were approaching, or I could see that we were going to approach a need to move away from SAML as a way to get into AWS. But we were kind of off running with that from the beginning. But we quickly ran into a situation where all the Okta CLI tools for AWS access expected that you had an Okta password, but we were a Google Auth primary shop, so Okta had no idea what our password was. And so kind of overnight, I went and recreated an app that we had built at Netflix to just get some generic access to the cloud console without needing to have IAM users again. And then everything kind of just has been built up on top of that. We were a BeyondCorp world needing identity, so I kind of built and bootstrapped identity in that application itself. On how can I log in via CLI and get a token of sorts that would allow me to request credentials? How would I get into the console? Well, let me front this with an ALB and add OIDC via Okta. So trying to leverage some tricks, because even at the time, I think the team was 3 people. This was very early security days. We were trying to spin all this up. And then we started scaling really big, and it became more the problems that I mentioned already, hitting the group limits. How do you get access to groups? And so we just started toying with things. The last thing we wanted was to inundate help desk with a bunch of requests. So we started building just access request flow for cloud access in the app that we built that we, internally we call Doormat. It's like if you walk across the threshold into the cloud, I guess. We made it such that, you could request access to developer, viewer. Special teams had access to request admin if needed. We kind of had pulled over an old account metadata system that we had built at Netflix called Swag as a way to keep track of all of our accounts and what groups exist and map to what roles. And so we just kind of kept piecing things together. And as we saw a need, just kept kind of iterating on the internal product, if you will, of what's next. And as we kind of built that out and learned and saw success, we're like, maybe we should abstract this a little bit and make it not just cloud focused. And that's when we started trying to pull the identity pieces out and group abstraction pieces out and kind of building our own little a new tool that we call Passport that allows us to kind of own source of truth for groups and take advantage of what we had learned from the cloud access request flow and start using it for other things as well.
Yeah, I love the this story of when they say necessity is the mother of all innovation. It sounds almost like you were running behind HashiCorp's exploding in growth. You're running to just catch up. It's how do we pull these tools together to just keep up with things and not have it break?
I mean, overnight, I think it was Devin on my team when we hit that Google group limit. One of the things also is root accounts, right? You still want to be able to get access to email for all the root accounts, but you don't necessarily want to be in that group because you can only be in so many groups. And so Devin went off and built, I think it was just him, but the team went off and built basically an email routing where we have this root email router now where we have a database that essentially this account, the root emails can go to these people or these mailing lists, so that if we spun up an account just for you, you would still have access to support case emails and things. But as an operations team, we'd still be able to see emails for every account, so that we could, if we did get an abuse complaint or something, we'd be able to surface that and not rely on teams bringing that to us. So yeah, it's just kind of necessity. We've had to be very creative in how we've addressed some of these things, because the last thing we wanted was to do the Google Plus trick on the emails, right? Because we knew more people would need access to it than us, and we didn't want everyone to have access to all the root account emails across all the accounts. And so it very quickly became custom software everywhere.
Yep, makes sense. You touched a little bit for a second there about wanting to do like just building access requests, let's say, for more of the privileged accounts in your AWS environments. And I'm really curious about how this kind of going conceptual here for a second, but I wanted to explore the differences in sort of old school privilege access management versus like more of a cloud forward privilege access management solution. Because, I definitely think there are some like changes there in terms of like patterns and how you provision access and how you even think about like credentials in that context. And I'm just curious, like maybe get your hot take on, do you see a big difference between sort of more classical privilege access management versus what I would call like kind of cloud forward, cloud first privilege access management around, AWS roles and temporary elevated access and how do you think about that? And maybe also do the tools that you built at HashiCorp extend beyond AWS? Like, can you use that for Salesforce privilege access management? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, no, I'd say, I think you touched on it pretty well right there. And I think the biggest difference between classic privilege access management and, if you want to say, cloud forward or cloud first access, is that temporary nature. So the ability to get additional permissions or temporary access to an environment, I think was never thought of in the past, right? Or if you did, you needed to, hey, Alex, I need access to this account. Can you grant me access? And then when I'm done, I'll come tell you, and then you can remove my access. That was the temporariness of any access back in the day, right? And then, hopefully I remember to tell you I was done, or a week later or so, you ping me and say, hey, Will, did you ever finish that task? And can I remove your access? Right? And I still think a lot of companies operate on that today. But, we wanted to not necessarily do that. We really drive into least privilege as best as we can, right? And we've tried to simplify it in a way that we don't have these unique roles per account, because then that really, if we say developer account, we want to know what that means across the board consistently. We don't want to then pair it with developer in this AWS environment or in this Azure environment. So we've tried to stay pretty consistent on what privileges do we hand out across the board. I think there's some small things here and there that we carve out for sales environments to be able to do, like EKS OIDC, but where we don't normally run that in our other environments. So we've allowed that in some accounts. So we've got some exclusions there, but we've wanted to just really have a way to understand what access means what across, in what environment, and then how can we provide that access. And a lot of the temporariness that we've been striving for, started from a security point of like, I don't want you to have permissions to the world if you don't need them, or you shouldn't have that access to that because you moved teams or something like that. But also, selfishly, as we grew and I was having to do user access reviews for admin across, I think it was only like thousands of accounts at that time. It was just a pain, right? And it was pretty simple because my team was the only team that was justified for admin. And so it was kind of scanning the list, seeing if I saw anyone outside of my team name. And, Excel was my friend with filters and sorts and things. But, it's still a lot of time and effort to have to do those things. And so we collaborated with some companies, seeing how did they approach things. And I think it was Square that actually gave me the idea of like, let's just abstract this group mentality and not make it specific to the environment that we're accessing. It could be Azure AD, it could be Google, it could be Okta. It doesn't matter as long as we treat everything the same. And if we could do that and we had temporary access for one, it makes it very easy to do temporary access for all. And if access is temporary, then maybe I don't have to do access reviews ever. And so it became this like a goal from security to do least privilege, and then it became a selfish goal of I never want to do user access reviews again. And I think our GRC team summarized a huge amount of time savings. And when they looked at like how long does an audit take every quarter, and that became a huge sell internally. With this, if we adopt this everywhere, we can save a ton of time, which saves money.
Yeah. I mean, so many good nuggets in there. Let's click a little bit more on the least privilege access part of it, because I think, you mentioned it sounded like one of the driving goals, and obviously there's this like saving clicks and calories. If everything's temporary access and it's removed after it's not needed, you don't have to do UARs. It's not as painful, less spreadsheet work. Like that's all goodness. But then the other benefit is you've decreased that standing level of access across all your different environments, right? So it's like your blast radius on threats and potential account compromises is substantially lower. And it sounds like from earlier, part of you building this out was literally just kind of keeping up with like the horizontal scale out of HashiCorp's business, and just the need to like wrangle access across 22,000 accounts. It necessitates automation and really building out tooling, but there's that security outcome value as well. And I'm really kind of curious, when you're thinking about building the solution out, how much of this was just automation, sort of, we just need to, keep the lights on and we're horizontally scaling out and we need tooling to be able to automate that, versus really driving towards the security outcome? Or was it both? And on the security outcome around least privilege access, how do you explain that value to maybe like non-technical or non-security folks? And did you have to do that? Like, I don't know if you had to wrangle like, hey, I need more people on the team to build this out. Like, do you have that conversation? Because I think sometimes security people understand that, the security speak around least privilege access and why that's necessary, but then how do you communicate that in terms of like value to the business? I know I got like 3 questions wrapped up in there, but
yeah, I'd say the main driver behind it all was security and least privilege. I think a lot of it also was wanting to have a central system that knew what everyone's access was, if you will, what group membership looked like in Okta versus Google versus something else. And because as you build out more internal services, you either keep them open to everyone or you start building some sort of auth-Z into them. And if you don't know what groups people are part of, it's hard to do that. And if you want to start giving people the ability to do that, you start looking at like, how do I give them an access key to Google? And then you realize that Google's permissioning isn't that great. So you have to give them a ton of permissions. And same thing with Okta. You have to give them a ton of permissions as well. And then you risk that they're hitting rate limits just like everyone else. And so you start thinking that was a lot of the whole idea behind, let's just create a service behind it that had the source of truth so that we could then hand out what we needed. But yeah, I think least privilege was always the idea there. As we've grown, as we have new services here internally, my permission set grew exponentially inside. All of a sudden I was, at one point admin to over 1,000 accounts, plus Google admin, plus Okta I had a ton of permission, and it's just not something I really wanted. And so that was part of the drivers, like, how do I get rid of my own permissions, but I can get them if I need them? If I'm on call or if something gets escalated to me, how can I easily get those permissions back? And that's what really started driving the whole least privilege. Oh, we could actually do this. We solved it for the cloud, but let's solve it for other things. It's definitely it's a hard sell to teams that are used to having their permissions all the time, right? Because all of a sudden you're taking away their access. They could think that you're encroaching on their territory. They're afraid of having to go request access to 80 things every day to do their job. Where my argument is, I bet you don't do this permission every day, or I bet you don't access this system even though you think you are. And so it's actually not as bad as you think. But a lot of it, the biggest sell was, for some of the teams internally was, hey, we could reduce the amount of time it takes for your team to get onboarded. You no longer have to, because all of our systems are under SOC 2, ISO 27001, additional things as we get more compliance requirements from product teams. Access requests have to be logged, they have to be justified, approved, reviewed, and as you scale out, once again, it became a new engineer on this team needed to request access to 15 different things. Well, the company scaled as well, and so we're now over 2,000 people where we were 600, and so help desk was able to handle that workload. But now it takes longer to get help desk to resolve a ticket, and so a lot of it was figuring out what is the pain point for the teams that I'm trying to sell to, and let's see how I can frame this new system in a way that they get excited about, right? I don't think I could sell, actually, in some cases it was selling, hey, you don't have to do user access review again, and that was super exciting. In other cases it was, hey, your engineers can get up to speed much faster and you'll be in control because the minute you click that button to approve, they're going to get in the group, right? And so it became this, what candy am I providing to that person that really hits that sweet tooth of theirs to get them excited about the thing. But then once again, it's still, how can we prioritize and get this adopted? Because it's changing systems and what they integrate with. And, so it was, 100% towards least privilege. Then it became this really nice sell, especially to executives, of like, hey, we can reduce access, which our customers want to see anyway. We can save time and money for access reviews, and we can guarantee that we're never going to have someone outside, someone that leaves the company, as an example, having this access in this account still. Especially if you've got systems like even our own internal Terraform Cloud was a different RBAC system, and so we needed to integrate with that because there wasn't a standard flow towards onboarding and offboarding that of some of our other systems that are just typical SaaS systems. And so, it kind of became this, I would tell different stories to different people to get them excited about the project. While internally, like you said, from the security standpoint, we could see the benefit. The story to the GRC team was, hey, I'm going to save you a lot of time, and got them on my side, and they would help sell the story as well. And now we're just on the journey of like, how fast can we adopt this everywhere? And we've got this huge backlog of still things to target and address. We're making progress, and that's the most important part.
That's so great. I love this story. It's like you targeted the story towards the pain of the audience that you're helping with the solution, but like at the end of the day, it's all about least privilege, and like that was really like the security objective and the goal that you guys were trying to accomplish. I also and tell me if this is fair or not, but it sounds like there's a couple ways to, I think least privilege is confusing to a lot of people out there today. Like they're trying to understand like, well, what does that mean? Or what should I do? Like, how do I actually achieve it? It feels like this kind of like second order, like objective, but maybe a little bit intractable at times. Is it fair to say, I've always thought about it in terms of kind of two pieces. One is shaping the roles and permissions for identities in terms of like what they can do. And then the second piece is really about limiting those roles and permissions so that people don't have things that they don't need. That idea of like kind of zero standing privilege. Is that a fair, I know I'm playing this back to you, but I want to see if I'm missing something in that understanding, or is there anything else to that you would add?
No, I'd say that's super fair. And I think a lot of people overemphasize the first one, which is, I think, the more complicated one, where I think this is where, I kind of mentioned we scaled horizontally. We kept the roles pretty consistent across the board, and we focus on that second one. And I think that's the easier one to solve, especially with, tools like the company that you're building and the others, in the space are helping folks get to that second one much faster. Where I think a bunch of people are focused on like the repo kit model of, let me take away the permissions from your exact role that you use all the time to make sure that you don't have a permission that you don't need, instead of thinking about, especially if you focus on the human aspect from the beginning, let me just only put you in that role when you need to do something. And then we can take it away and the risk of having too much permission is highly mitigated compared to if you had it all the time and your credentials were leaked, right? Because chances are you're not going to have the permission if you leaked your credential. And if you're doing the other things that you should be doing with temporary credentials and things, you further mitigate that risk. And so the need to have that really right-sized permission on that, the first part of what you said, becomes less important if you can solve that second one. It's all important for the multiple layers of defense and things, and you definitely want number one. But yeah, I would often say it's probably more important to provide that time-based, privileged access management for can you access this thing or not versus what is the permission I'm giving you when you access that thing.
Right. It's like, was the role perfectly crafted and you had that access all the time, even when you were asleep? It's like a little bit like missing the point.
In some cases, even with AWS, which I feel has a really robust, RBAC permission system, it's still very hard to restrict access to just the things that you need access to in a multi-tenant environment. And so you're going to spend a ton of time trying to get that right and use attributes and injection and things to try to really tune that down. And ultimately, the developers can come back to you in next quarter and say, hey, we're doing this new thing, and you're going to have to go revamp that permission, or hey, we want this new bucket, so you need to go also change this. And so, it's just that's the never-ending story where the time-based access or just-in-time access or whatever you want to call it is, I think, the thing that help make strides longer and that are there. You see the effect of that much longer than, and you're not revisiting that as much as you would the first.
Yep, definitely. I feel like crafting and shaping roles is really important for like service to service. Like you should be able to pretty tightly define like what a service needs or what actions or data it needs access to. But humans, by the nature of like humans doing human things, sometimes is a little bit more artisanal. So it seems like the goal is like, okay, well, like broad strokes, we have an admin, we have a read only, we have billing, we have whatever those different roles might be that kind of like scope into a set of privilege actions or things that you want to perform in an environment. And then don't get like so obsessed with like super restricting or tweaking down that role, but really focus much more on the just-in-time access. That makes a ton of sense. Kind of on that note, did you, I'm really curious, as you were rolling the solution out, did you think about reporting out on any of these like metric? Like, do you have a huge graph above your desk that's got like standing access levels and HashiCorp and the AWS accounts or something like that? Or like, did you, I mean, obviously like some of the benefits were clear, right? Like when the user access review volume goes substantially down, like it's pretty obvious that that's having an impact, but did you metric that out in any other sort of way or like report that out or like monitor anything in particular?
I think in early days, I was tracking, metrics around were people actually requesting access to things. And I wasn't necessarily concerned with how many people have standing access, but were people actually using the system and was it working, or what was the feedback or or whatnot, right? And I think one of our long-term goals is to be able to create that identity graph of, if I want to become Terraform Cloud admin at HashiCorp, what's the path to get there, right? Or what groups potentially get me access in the right order? We'd love to be able to kind of threat model that out and then figure out and make sure that we don't have gaps in that path and have the right justifications or, to key turn or whatever we want to have there, right? I think now a lot of it is, as we've seen adoption, we're tracking how many apps do we have behind this new system. Is it increasing? Are we doing our part to make onboarding, offboarding, and security of HashiCorp successful by not just getting the apps that we care about, but the apps that business cares about as well? And then I think I track sometimes, I wish I should go build a dashboard.
Yeah, lots of other stuff to do.
Other groups that we feel are targeted in the compliance things like SOC 2 and SOX and whatnot. Have we solved permanent access to those groups? And it's kind of like when we had static keys and IAM users early days here, we were tracking down and making sure that number kept kept going down. And so the same thing would be getting to a point where we never have permanent access outside of maybe a break glass system user or something. So that, I think those are the success metrics for any sort of just-in-time access system. And then, I think as we scale, there's just your operational metrics on like, are we keeping up with the number of clients that we have talking to us? What is our uptime or downtime, especially if you run your own system, and as you move more and more into the critical path, it becomes super important that you're resilient to, faults and things.
Yeah, you're in the business of provisioning access. One last question maybe before we boogie out, but I'm really curious. It sounds like your journey on Passport and Doormat was very much sort of engineering driven first at, facilitating like just-in-time access, temporary elevated access to AWS. But then it sounds like it's expanded beyond that and you're touching other business systems and SaaS systems. Have you noticed as you've made that transition to kind of supporting the full set of SaaS applications and IaaS and the HashiCorp environment that there's been just a difference in terms of how those different constituents want to use the product or engage with it? Like, did you find big differences between, again, kind of that like engineering persona, developer persona, maybe first using the product versus now if you do have people in there requesting Salesforce admin? I don't know if that's what you're doing, but like those types of use cases, a little bit more like business app, productivity app centric use cases. Have you found there to be like a difference between those different users?
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like, the engineering users are the ones that are more adept to, hey, could we get a CLI to make access requests easier? Or, there's the balance of which apps need access requests for additional access or to access them from the beginning. Which apps can you just have access based on your role? Within your role, how is that defined? And is that the way that we do policy on that? Is that okay with what SOX cares about for access control? Or, especially if you're thinking about eliminating user access review. And then it also, I think beyond, so I would say we have balance between, the engineering side that's probably more adept to go in and request access to something versus folks in legal or finance that just want the access because they should have it. But then there's also the whole balance on, do the apps that we want to target even support the things that we want to achieve, right? Is there skim? If there's skim, how does it work? Is it going to take an hour for that access, or is it going to be immediate, right? And so, can we tell that consistent story once again that once you get put in the group, you have access, or is it within the next hour you should have access? If not, come talk to us, and we'll see did something break on the back end, or does the app even support skim at all? And if it doesn't support skim, does it have a user management API that we can build a connector, a provider to, or I've never asked you how you pronounce baton or baton.
Baton.
Yeah. Like, can you build a baton for that if you're using Conductor 1, right? But then if you think about it, if you've got say 200 SaaS systems that you're talking to, the easy ones are the ones that you just provide access to Okta. It gets your group information and your RBAC changes as your group membership changes. Those are the easy, like, piece of cake, can integrate them in 5 minutes. Then you've got Skim, you've got to go set those up, understand how that Skim provider works, because every company is doing it different. I've seen people pull your group attributes out of a user attribute versus a group, depending on how they implemented Skim on their side. And then once again, the timing, or in a lot of cases, this app just doesn't support Skim at all, or it doesn't support even provisioning. And so you still have some manualness to things, which is never fun, towards the end goal solution of, automate everything. But, once again, it becomes, you'll find that majority of the apps that you want don't necessarily support Skim, or if they don't support Skim, they may have a user management API, but then you have to go build that connector, right? And then, like our team, we basically have 2 coders on Passport, and 2 operators helping with other things within Passport and the Okta side. it takes a long time to build those things. And so, I think when we started this journey, we always internally at HashiCorp do build, buy, contribute trade studies. I think when we first started, Doormat definitely knew there was nothing out there. First starting Passport thing is we wanted to own source of truth, which you can only own source of truth if you kind of do it yourself. But I think even before y'all came out of stealth.
Yeah.
And so, we've kind of been starting to build these things. But even now, we kind of think like, is there some...
Yeah.
You still want to continue building all these providers, or is there someone else that has built them already that we could potentially integrate with? You can build the system, but then you have to maintain it, and then you have to continue to build the things to continue to make it successful, which, we've basically today have signed up for continued maintenance of the system.
The roadmap backlog is like a real thing on security engineering teams when you build 100%. Something like really successful. You guys are like product managers.
Yeah, and then we don't have a product management team, right? So we're doing product management ourselves. We're trying to balance what does security thinks important versus what is our SOX team thinks important. Thankfully, we align on both of those. But then there's internal cloud teams that want certain things, and it's like, where does that fit in our roadmap? And we're trying to address beyond human identity to system identity as well. So how do we do machine to machine? How do machines and humans talk to the same API in the same way? So it's been a lot of fun to have this dream or vision in the beginning and start seeing it slowly come to fruition.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a cool journey. Will, we talked about a lot of awesome things this episode. We talked about least privilege access, about just in time, about how Hashi has built out those different technologies internally, connecting the different SaaS systems. Would definitely maybe love to have you on for a second round of something else. We can go deep on like SCIM and IDPs and some of the other infrastructure in the IAM environment. But before we leave, put you on the spot, hot one. Do you have any predictions for security over the next few years? Anything that's like hot, like big on your mind?
I really hope that someone solves the identity space as a whole. I always say, there's a bunch of companies like, solving the IDAG space or solving, kind of the spiffy space of, system access. I'm super looking forward to seeing which company starts branching out into more, right? But I think AI is obviously making lots of splash. I joked when it first came out that I hope AI died with the blockchain, but also knowing that it's never going to.
No.
But I hope there's some really innovative ways that companies can start using AI, specifically in the identity space. I think it'd be really, I think AI is going to be super powerful there because you're going to start being able to use AI to predict should this thing get approved automatically or not, and really pull the human element out of it because, hey, your peer has this, or on your on-call, you're going to be able to, AI is going to be able to look at all the different pieces of data and do it much faster and probably more accurate than a human. And so you're going to be able to take the human error out of identity, I think. And so that's probably my big prediction. Beyond the other use cases of AI and identity is probably going to be huge.
Yep, makes a ton of sense. Or at least at a minimum, the AI should be able to give the human a lot more context on the decision and help them understand what it is that they're doing.
Definitely. AI will at least make user access review much easier.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Will, great having you on, man. I really appreciate it. And this was an awesome chat. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it, getting this out there. Thanks a lot. See you. Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at Conductor One. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductor1.com. Until next time.